So my message for Sunday, April 26th, I've called Some Things About Jesus. It's really based on Luke 24 and that verse 27 in the passage where Luke writes that beginning with Moses and all the prophets, Jesus interpreted to them things about himself from all the scriptures. And so I wanted to talk about some things that I notice about Jesus in this passage. And one of the things that I notice is that to love and follow Jesus comes with scars. To follow Jesus in his way of loving God and neighbor will mean there are painful, difficult days. No one in this world is meant to be happy all the time. And there is a skill that I have learned along the way that is identified in multiple disciplines, in multiple areas. I learned it in cognitive behavioral therapy. I learned it in 12-step recovery and spirituality, where we're working toward emotional sobriety. I have learned this skill in leadership training models, in racial justice training, in conflict resolution training, in managing anxiety. I've learned this skill in having difficult conversations with people. I've learned and used this skill in practicing spiritual disciplines, like even learning how to pray. The skill is the capacity for distress tolerance. Distress tolerance is actually all about learning to be unhappy. To tolerate more and more the feelings that you currently find intolerable. But see, we'd rather not feel unpleasant things. We like feeling good. I like feeling good. And so if there's a feeling or a situation or a person that is uncomfortable or distressing, I want to avoid it. I want to go to any lengths to avoid it sometimes. And so we do. We numb ourselves to what's happening around us or inside us or both. And distress tolerance is the ability, though, to accept and to allow and to feel the feelings that we find distressing, that we'd rather avoid. Now, they can be feelings of sadness, anxiety, panic, fear. They can be cravings or feelings of hunger or feelings of boredom. Whatever it is that you want to avoid, or whoever it is you want to avoid. It can be even feelings of happiness or pleasure, though, that can cause us distress. And some people, or sometimes, when we want to punish ourselves for feeling these things that distress us or having them, we can get very self-critical and engage in some self-denying habits that are actually quite harmful. For example, I know some people who actively keep themselves miserable because believing in their own happiness is too threatening. Or we might isolate from and reject others in our own minds instead of reaching out to them because we'd rather not feel the disappointment and hurt that might come if they reject us. Now, I've had that fear and that tendency before, where I'll just be by myself or quiet or shy and not be very outgoing toward other people. And it's really a fear of being rejected or not being understood that keeps me isolated. So see, it's this reluctance to feel good in a way. I had one widower once when I was working for hospice as a chaplain. He told me how he just stayed home and isolated for the first 6 months after his wife's funeral. He couldn't allow himself to enjoy any of the things he used to do with his wife when she was alive because it seemed wrong, it seemed disloyal, like he was being unfaithful to her. If he let himself enjoy their favorite places or TV shows or life even at all now, it would be as if he didn't care that she was dead. So I asked him to please tell me more about that, because I was curious, really, what was going on inside him that he wouldn't let himself be happy. I wondered, had she wanted to see him miserable without her when she was alive? Was she, some kind of controlling, jealous, insecure person? I mean, she didn't come across that way to me. I knew her. But people are different around different people, and I wanted to understand his grief process. So I asked him, tell me more about that. And I wondered because I was perplexed. I hoped that he wouldn't stay isolated for the rest of his life and miserable, sad. But I remember feeling something like that when I was in Haiti for that summer's mission trip, the first time I'd ever seen that kind of poverty. And I remember I felt guilty for feeling grateful that I had enough to eat. It was really hard the first few days for me to eat because everyone around me, children, were malnourished and starving and so poor that they were sick from not having enough to eat. And I remember feeling bad that I was hungry and could eat. But just because I was hungry and grateful to be eating did not mean that I didn't care about the starving children in Haiti around me. In fact, I was there because I did care and I wanted to learn how I could help. But being there meant I had to feel the sadness and the helplessness I felt, confronted with such huge suffering and need. And it meant that I wanted to tap into my own agency to learn how to help and to feel grateful for being able to eat. Didn't discount, didn't negate the sadness I felt for the people who didn't have enough to eat. I could have all those feelings. So when I asked this widower to tell me more about what that was like for him, that he felt bad for wanting to be happy, he said, he knew that she wouldn't want him to be miserable. And so not only did he feel bad about wanting to be happy, he felt bad about still feeling miserable because she wouldn't want him to feel miserable. But anytime when he started to feel happy, he felt bad. And so I said, well, can you tell me, do you only feel one thing at a time? Or can you feel more than one thing at a time? Have you ever felt both appreciative and annoyed at her when she was alive? I have 4 kids. I have been a appreciative and annoyed with them all at the same time. So I was just trying to, create some common ground. And he said, well, yes. Actually, whenever she made him coffee in the mornings before breakfast, he was very appreciative. But then she always left the coffee maker on, heating away, and sometimes even after the coffee pot was empty and it was still cooking away. And he said that really bugged him, actually. But then he would feel bad that he was mad and feel like he was just being petty and ungrateful for the fact that she'd made him coffee. And so we talked about how it's actually possible to feel both and one not negate the other. That we're actually complicated and complex people. The scriptures say that we're fearfully and wonderfully made, right? That we're able to feel all sorts of things, and feelings are not bad or good. They're sort of morally neutral. They're what we feel, like feeling tired or the color of our hair or our eyes, our feelings. It's what our brain does. And we can feel sad and glad and mad and grateful all at the same time toward the same people, the same person. And sometimes we feel nothing, especially when we're grieving. Sometimes we're just numb. We're exhausted. Like we could feel sad that our beloved pet died, and also glad that we no longer get woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning by her barking nonstop at the wind or the thunderstorm. We can feel glad and grateful when our grandchild brings us a tool from the shed, and annoyed when he drops it and breaks it. We can feel both those things. So I remember how in the Bible it says the disciples felt both fear and joy at the appearance of the risen Christ. And here in this passage it says they start out feeling sad, and then they talk to him about their feelings of astonishment and confusion and fear. Really, they're running away from Jerusalem, trying to get out of Dodge as fast as they can. So they felt all sorts of things. And Jesus had to tell them over and over, don't be afraid, peace be with you, when he appears to the people and makes himself known to them. They loved him, and they were also terrified every time he showed up. It's like the other day, I forgot my daughter was home now from college, in quarantine, and classes on campus having been canceled. But I forgot she was home with me, and suddenly she appeared behind me in the kitchen and startled me so bad I kind of yelped and jumped and nearly dropped the water I was carrying. And she was just not what I expected. Well, Jesus was so not what they expected. He was suddenly back from the dead. That was unexpected. And in this gospel passage in Luke chapter 24, the two disciples are walking to Emmaus, and Jesus shows up again in a very unexpected way. He deliberately plays a prank on these two Jewish disciples, Cleopas and what's his name or what's her name. We don't know who the second disciple is. We just know there are two of them. Maybe it's his wife or his cousin or his best friend, some other disciple. Nobody now knows who this was, but back when Luke was writing it, I bet they knew. Anyway, Jesus deliberately disguised who he really was from the two of them and pretends to be clueless about what was happening, what had been happening for the last 3 days in Jerusalem. And so Cleopas is like, what kind of clueless idiot fool are you? Are you the only one, he says, the only stranger in Jerusalem who doesn't have a clue what's been happening? I mean, like, are there more idiots like you running around that we need to be worried about or concerned for? I mean, in our day, it'd be like asking, well, you know, where have you been? What rock have you been under? That you don't know what's been happening, that they crucified Jesus of all people. And then there are earthquakes, and then there are angels, and then the women, and meanwhile the Roman soldiers and the temple authorities are not happy. And so these two, Cleopas and best get the heck out of there before anything else terrible or crazy or traumatic or awful happens. I mean, the whole city was in an uproar. The claims that Jesus' body was missing. And then some were saying Jesus was not even dead anymore. No, they needed to get as far away from Jerusalem as fast as their frightened, sad, bewildered feet could take them. The road to Emmaus is like the road to whatever we're avoiding and running from. It can be the last place we really should be going. It can be its own little road to hell. My father used to quote the adage, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions." That road we take to avoid our distressing feelings, to avoid a difficult person or a difficult circumstance, the road we take to avoid a funeral or a job interview or a college admission application or a tax form, the road we take to run from our past, the distress that we might feel, the shame that we feel at being less than perfect or not what somebody else wanted us to be, the road we take to avoid the shame that we feel, like that beloved widower I mentioned. He thought to grieve meant he had to feel sad all the time. He thought he was supposed to be miserable, and so to allow himself to feel happy now without his beloved wife, I mean, they'd been married longer than I'd been alive when I met him and her and then did her funeral. I mean, he thought that if he wasn't sad, then that meant he wasn't grieving, and then there must be something wrong with him. Because if he wasn't grieving, then he didn't deserve her love, or worse, it must mean he never really loved her. It was just so confusing for him. And so he was isolating and avoiding happiness. He was on the road to Emmaus with himself, ashamed that he was forgetting her, scared that trying to feel happy meant he wasn't also sad, running from his feelings after his wife's death. The roads we take to get as far away from what we don't understand or don't like or don't believe, those roads are the roads to Emmaus. And they, like all the roads that actually take us away from the truth about ourselves or about what is really happening, that take us away from God, the road to hell, if you will, those are often paved with good intentions. I mean, we mean well when we run away. That time when we stayed quiet, or when we didn't stay quiet, when instead we said what we said about his clothes or her attitude. We meant well when we avoided that sad feeling or that awkward silence or that difficult conversation. We meant well. We didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings, or we just wanted to avoid that boring person or that person who talks too much. We mean well, don't we? When we avoid an argument, or we don't want to make trouble, or trying to avoid the displeasure or the wrath of someone else. I mean, these two disciples were scared. They were confused. They were sad. They were running for their own lives, trying to avoid death at the angry hands and swords of the Romans, who seemed to like to hunt down troublemakers and nonconformists, especially Jewish ones. And they were also, as Jesus pointed out to them, full of doubt about what was actually obvious. He was the Messiah, and the Bible told them so. I wonder if you have ever been on that road to Emmaus. I mean, not the actual literal road, although I know some of you have, that are listening to me, have been to Israel, have been on those roads. But I mean the metaphorical, the spiritual road to Emmaus. The road to Emmaus is the path of least resistance, the path of avoidance, of denial. It's when we run with and from our enemies and our past. Maybe it's our relatives or our addictions or our losses or a doubt or a fear or traumas. We all do it. We all have at least one road to Emmaus time. Even as Christians, as disciples, we can find ourselves scared, sad, and disappointed on the road to Emmaus. Maybe now, listening to me, this is your road to Emmaus time. You're running away, or you have been. We all do it because to do it so often feels like the thing to do. It feels like necessary self-preservation to avoid those distressing, difficult things in life. But Jesus said, before he died, to his disciples, that if we seek to run away from what distresses us, if we seek to preserve our life by running away from what we can't control, what we feel and who we are, if we seek to preserve our life by avoiding the truth about it, and if we try and run away from the hardest parts about following Jesus, then we may think we're getting somewhere. It might feel like we're getting somewhere safe. We might evenly actually manage to have gained the whole world, to have money and education and pleasure, to have found Mr. or Mrs. Right, to have nice clothes and a nice house and a nice life. But we're actually lost to ourselves, and we've engaged in a process of losing our souls, our real selves. Jesus said, if you seek to save your life, to preserve it, you're going to lose it. But if you lose your life for his sake, you'll find it. He said, what will it really profit you if you do all these things to gain the world, but in doing so you forfeit your soul? The one is temporary, gaining the world, but you can't take any of it with you, except yourself. And the other, yourself, your soul, is eternally more important than anything this world has to offer. Your psycho-spiritual well-being, your eternal life. That's what this is about. And these two disciples, they encounter Christ. And when they do, they're able to then hurry back in the dark to Jerusalem. The road back to facing the hard stuff. It can be a dark time. It's a come to Jesus kind of road. It's when you encounter God telling you stuff you need to hear, the long and the short of it. And it's you asking God in to stay with you, to break bread with you. It's when you listen to what's happening in your heart. You ask yourself, what am I really feeling? Is my heart burning within me? Is this the Spirit tugging at it? Is my heart suddenly like a caged bird beating its wings against the bars, trying to be free? Is it when you can recognize the risen Christ has all along been talking to you? Yeah, that road. That road is the beginning of the way back. And it's paved with faith, with scriptures and experiences that point us to Jesus. It's a road paved with hope. Hope that God is still up to something marvelous, something good. It's paved with hope that we are not just out here on our own, our friends dead, our beliefs and our sense of community shattered. This virus spreading like the Roman soldiers did then, stopping people in their tracks and looting their lives and killing people that we love. That there's hope that something more is happening than just schools closed and the future uncertain and bleak and heavy with the losses we feel and face just increasing and becoming overwhelming. The road back is a road paved with hope, that reality is more than what we see with our eyes and can see with our fingers even. It's not just only what we see. It's a road paved with hope that God is still up to his old tricks. God is at work in disguise. Often we don't recognize it until later. God is slowing us down, taking us the harder way, not the path of least resistance. Leading us during this terrible time, this pandemic time, to humble ourselves before him, to walk with God, waiting like Jesus did for us to invite God in more, to invite God to show us more of who he is, to ask God to give us deeper encounters with the risen Christ and that love that raises the dead, that never quits on us. Yeah, that road is paved with love. That road to get us back is the road, the way of love, not fear. It's the way of acceptance, of curiosity, not of pretending we know it all already or can do it all on our own. It's a road paved with a love for and a hunger for deep conversations, for truth, for spiritual growth, for Bible studies that show us Jesus. Jesus gave them a master class in the Bible right there on that road to Emmaus. This road back is a road paved with love. It's walked with friends, with faithful companions, and with strangers, and maybe even just with quality time spent getting to know and like yourself. It's time spent forgiving yourself. It's full of encounters that matter, that are not just shallow engagements about the price of oil and the weather. It's a road where we make room for new ways of seeing our present circumstances. It's a road where Jesus will show us how to see our current circumstances, just as he showed those two disciples. They were social distancing as fast as they could from all that trouble back in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the hot spot. of chaos and suffering and trauma and fear and death. And they were getting the heck out of there. And Jesus will show us how to meet him now in our current situation, and to be drawn ever closer to God in ways we never have before. There's no going back to before Easter for those two disciples. There was no going back to normal. Normal had suddenly, totally changed. Jesus was risen from the dead. There's no going back for us to what was before COVID-19 turned our lives upside down. But there's a new way of being ahead of us. There are new ways we can encounter Jesus and be his disciples now. It's in new spaces, like Zoom, like this, on Facebook, in cyberspace. We meet and are drawn closer to the risen Christ and to each other in a new way, even as we feel the loss of physical closeness and as we grieve the loss and the deaths of those we love. But we can still meet God. We can still meet God and be drawn closer to Christ in new ways. Now, in this time, God can make this time holy for us. By all means and any means necessary, we can use this time to point ourselves and help point the world back to God, back to our Jerusalems, back to whatever it is we have been so busy avoiding. Now is the time to go back to our metaphorical Jerusalem, maybe even back to church, to a deeper spirituality, certainly, to relationships that matter for eternity. It's time to go back to a better care of creation and not the mindless, greedy consumerism and consumption and pollution of creation. It's time to get back to where the people we need are, where other disciples are, where we can get the help we need to stop avoiding who we are and what we really feel. It's time to get back to where Christ can reveal himself again and again, to be bigger than our grief, bigger than our fear, to love us deeper than we ever could imagine, to be Lord over what we've lost. It's time to go back to the places inside ourselves with renewed faith and hope, to the places and the feelings that make us uncomfortable, that scare us. Let's go back to Jerusalem and then on to Galilee. Stop running from what's wrong and go back, make peace with what's happened. It's time to understand and to tell others, to make amends, and to return to the places where the need is greatest for reconciliation, for healing, for hope. It's time to go where the hot spots of trouble are, to the places where we will be given a chance to speak our truth, to speak God's truth, to right wrongs and to practice forgiveness and humility, to work for greater mercy for the poor, the world's vulnerable, the elderly and the children in our own communities, the Native American and brown and black communities ravaged by inequity and inequality and injustice and ravaged by this virus. The least of these, Jesus called us. It's time to work for greater justice for everyone. To pray the kingdom of God come in us and through us. That God's will be done in us and through us on earth as it is in heaven. It's the road back to who we really are, who God is calling each of us to be. It is where Christ promises to be and to meet us. And if you're paying attention, it's a road paved with humor. It's definitely a way of humor, of laughter, especially at ourselves. But I've noticed God often shows up in ways we least expect, in disguise. I mean, Cleopas accuses Jesus of basically being a moron. I mean, where have you been, under a rock for the last 3 days? How do you not know what's been going on? And in reality, yes, Jesus has been in a tomb carved into the rock until the angel rolled the tombstone away. So not only does Jesus actually know what has been happening for the last 3 days, he knows what's been really going on for like the last 3 trillion years. I mean, he says, no, it's actually you two who are clueless. It's full of doubt, slow to believe. And Jesus takes Cleopas and what's her name or what's his face, the other disciple, through the entire Hebrew scriptures to tell them what happened to him was part of the master plan. To tell them what's been really going on for all of time in human history, and to tell them that in the future, Christ, the Son of Man, will come into his glory. So I close with this. If you feel like you're running on empty, running away from a disastrous yesterday on some kind of road to your personal Emmaus, God knows who you are and where you are today. So can you stop before this day is over and invite him in? Can you tell him you want him to stay with you? To come in and break bread with you? Can you ask Jesus, the risen Christ, to come and stay a while longer with you, to abide with you, just as you are? Just as you are. Can you ask God to show you in the ways that you need it, more of who God is, more of how much God's love is for you? Can you stop before the day is over and be with your feelings, whatever they are, and know that Christ is here with you? That God accepts you and loves you just as you are? Can you ask him to be real in your heart? Can you hear what your heart is telling you? That inward part of you where everything you care about resides, in the core of who you are. Can you take that to God today? Can you have all your feelings about it and stop running from the ones that distress you? Can you stop avoiding the difficult unknowns of your past or your future and ask Jesus to help you, to love you through it, because he will. He will. You might not recognize him at first. He might come disguised as your neighbor or me or a stranger or somebody who's annoying. you think is boring or ill or scared or troubled. But He will come if you ask Him. And He will be with you through it all. So can you welcome Him today? Can you welcome yourself today? And the Christ who lives in you will give you His light. Christ is risen. He's risen indeed. Thanks be to God. Hallelujah.